Welcome to today's episode of Falling to Freedom, where addiction ends and faith begins, the weekly podcast that brings thoughtful, informed, and challenging discussions about addiction to the forefront of everyone's minds. We join our host now, Chad Lacombe, for today's topic.
All right, well, today we are on location at CityLink with the Senior Director of Local Outreach at CityLink, Micah Tucker. Welcome, Micah.
Thank you.
All right. And today's topic is the intersection of homelessness, or I believe the new term is unhoused individuals, and addiction. You know, this plays a big part in the problem, and, you know, it's in the news a lot. A lot of money is put towards solving this. Most Americans, I believe, most people are compassionate about the issue, but are we really looking at it accurately? What role does addiction play in? And I think it plays a bigger role than often is put forth in the news. Just wanted to read something real quick. The city of Los Angeles, just last week, did a report, Los Angeles County Department of Health, and it was on mortality rates among this group, unhoused individuals. And they listed the leading causes of death among this community. Can I say community among them?
Absolutely.
So among this community, number one was overdose. So I mean, that right there, that statistic right there lets you know that addiction is a huge part of this problem. Second one was coronary heart disease. And it's my understanding that a lot of times that is brought on by addiction, like prolonged methamphetamine use, different drugs that really just tax the heart and eventually causes a heart attack. Transportation-related injuries, so that could be either, you know, drunk or intoxicated driving, or it could be someone that is, you know, on drugs, wanders out into the street and gets hit by a car or a truck. Homicide, so either amongst themselves or maybe someone else going and committing the homicides, and then suicide. So with those, you know, statistics just coming out, and I didn't give the numbers, but it's, you know, those are the leading causes. Those lead me to believe that this is a huge problem.
It is, yeah.
And so I was hoping that, you know, you are an expert in this subject matter, being involved, and I was hoping you could just share with our listeners, you know, your background and experience with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I started doing work with the unhoused community. Back then we still referred to them pretty exclusively as homeless.
Okay.
Even out of Skid Row in the late 90s, at a place called the Los Angeles Dream Center. And the first time I really ever kind of did work in ministry with someone that had been homeless, unhoused for an extended period of time was at that location. He was actually now clean from addiction, from substance abuse for more than a decade. And I was now doing ministry with him. And he began to talk about some of those things. And he had a really unique perspective on that, and really helped me. I was a bleeding heart who came from Indiana to Los Angeles to help people, right? And you just kind of have this idea.
Probably shocking.
Yeah, wide-eyed, and I'm going to help people. And I didn't really know how. How am I going to help? And so you begin to understand pretty quickly that the solutions are multifaceted, but also they're difficult. There's not an easy answer to many of these things. And even when someone has gotten out of substance abuse, has gotten off the streets, unfortunately, sometimes they'll return. That substance calls to them. And so I began to learn that, see that firsthand. We did a lot of ministry with Skid Row in Los Angeles and bringing people in every single week on buses, hundreds of people. And my fiance at the time, my wife now of 25 years, would visit for church, and we would sit at the back of the church, and that's where the homeless guys were asleep. At the back of the church from Skid Row, and occasionally they'd wake up and yell at whoever was preaching, "Hurry up, preacher, we're hungry!" You know, and you knew that they were there for food. Really, they were there for the meal. But many of them began to be touched by the care that people were showing, and began to think differently in their mindset. And I just really wanted to accentuate that. In 25 plus years of doing this, it's a mindset. It's a mentality, and if you can begin to try to get at that with the individual, you have some hope. Okay. If you can't break through those strongholds in their mind, it's really, really hard to. All the solutions, all the money you want to throw at the problem, if their mindset is still warped, it's just going to be difficult.
I think it's a good opportunity to unpack some of the complexity of the mindset of those who experience the unsheltered. just inevitably, sometimes addiction will take people there. Mental health challenges will take people there as well. So did I properly hear you that you have 25 years of experience in this capacity?
Absolutely. And in and out of this, but all my ministry experience has been almost exclusively in outreach in Southern California and the local community, and then even abroad in many countries, dealing with some of these issues.
So you've seen the complexity and the level of complexity that people experience. So can we talk a little bit about the challenges that you've seen and how complex it gets for people to unpack this?
I would love to. I think people relate to stories and stuff like that. And so for me, the first complexity that I'd like to point out is, so many years ago in LA, I was getting off the freeway, right in Echo Park, right kind of in the heart of the downtown area. And there was a lady, an older lady, that would panhandle at that exit ramp. And I think anybody that's lived in urban areas has experienced that, right?
Everybody's experienced
that. And maybe now at this point in America, not even in urban areas, right? But, she was older, and I had compassion for her, and I was working as a missionary, making no money, making $100 a month. And I had literally $1 in my pocket, and we were driving, and I kind of waved her to come over. And that gentleman I mentioned to before, Armando, who had been 12 years in addiction and homeless, living in parks, he said, "Put your money away." And I was very confused. And I thought, how hard-hearted could you be towards somebody who was in your same situation? He said, "I'm not hard-hearted." He said, "I would never give money to a homeless person after 1 o'clock in the afternoon." And that immediately, for me, as a young man, said, there's a complexity here. I don't understand. Explain this to me, right? And he did. He said, look, if you're giving money to somebody in the afternoon and the evening, it's almost assuredly going to their addiction. Whatever their substance of choice is, it's almost, you're just compounding the problem. You're influencing them towards that path. He said, now, if you see somebody early in the morning and they're out there, yes, that money's probably going to go for food. And I immediately learned a lesson in a 3-minute conversation that this is way more complex than just let me assuage my conscience by giving $1, giving $5, giving $10, right? Let me actually think about this deeply. And so we did. We talked about it. And from that conversation, we began to take, on our one day off from the other ministry we did, we'd go into MacArthur Park in downtown LA with soup and bread and some chocolate at 6 a.m. Because he said, I lived there. If we show up at 6 a.m., we might be able to talk to them. They've come off of their high. And so I also wanted to bring out to you guys, it's complex, but most of the friends that I've had over the years that were from the unhoused community talk about substance abuse and addiction like it's the norm, not the exception. He never said anybody wasn't high. Everybody was coming off their high, right? And so for him, it was 100% of his community of the unhoused were dealing with some form of substance, right?
Yeah. You've probably seen the progression of the effects of addiction as well in people's lives. Absolutely. I don't think anybody set out to drink a few beers and have a good time to end up on Skid Row or beyond, or even involved in the activities that they do during that unsheltered experience. So it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear the progression that you have seen in your experience, how people get kind of they'll experience something that seems temporary for a season, and then it becomes a lifestyle over time.
Yeah, I think as you said before, that's complex, right? You don't end up homeless because you're an addict. You can end up homeless because you're an addict, but I think a lot of times life happens, and homelessness begets addiction. It leads to that because it's readily available. Other people are there, and as you said, here, try this, and I think frequently, the longer that a person is unhoused, the longer that they're homeless, the more the substances are around them, the potentials, I would say, are exponential, and they're becoming an addict of some kind. It is, I don't want to say an inevitability, but it's almost an inevitability that the longer they're out there, the more this is going to grab a hold of them.
Micah, I know, based on a previous conversation that we had, it seemed like you kind of put the unhoused community into two categories. Correct me if I'm wrong. Short-term homelessness and long-term homelessness. Could you just kind of explain the difference between the two?
Absolutely. So the short-term homelessness, we typically classify that as 6 months or less. It can be up to a year. 6 months to a year is generally that idea. And many times those people are very diligently seeking solutions to their problems. They're trying to stop this before it gets out of control. They might be living in a car. They might be, and for us, a person could be homeless if they're couch surfing, if they're bouncing from a friend and family, whatever. But they don't have a place of their own that they call home, and they very easily could end up sleeping on the streets at any particular night. Right? Those people, in our experience, in my 25 plus years of it, are much more motivated to affect change in their own situation. They're taking, as we would say, the bull by the horns, and they want to do something. And so we'll see really good success if you can catch people in that initial season. So a shelter, a job placement program, things like that, those people are typically going to take advantage of those services. They are, and I hate to say this, I am a man myself, and so it's going to sound like I'm maybe against men, but women with children, families, those women are far more motivated, in my experience, to do something. Men with children too, just families in general. If they have others that are dependent on them, they seem to be much more motivated than a single person in that situation. And depression plays a part, bipolar, whatever you want. There might be a lot of reasons that plays in, but somebody that has someone dependent on them seems to be super motivated, and they tend to try to find those solutions and work for their own success.
Part of our commitment to the discussion also is thoughtful, insightful, informed. We want to get out on the edge of the conversation. I think transparency and authenticity through our lived experience is hugely beneficial in the conversation as well. So just want to be courageously transparent and share that I may have been one of the exceptions that you were talking about there for a season. I actually was in a shelter near Baseline in G Street in San Bernardino, not the exact demographic that I was most comfortable in, but it was necessary for me at that time.
Absolutely.
I had reached out to a cousin whose extra bedroom was her shoe closet, and so she said, "Sorry, Vic, we can't help you." I ended up on a pew in a church in a 30-day temporary scenario. And during that time, I was very much committed to creating a normalcy in my relationship to my son, my younger son, and to not break the rhythm of life that we had experienced in that time. So I identify with that sense of having a responsibility toward somebody else. A particular, a son or a daughter or a child, a family member who is depending on dad, who's depending on mom, for safety and for comfort and for shelter. And that was a difficult season, but by God's grace, I was able to persevere through that and experience that. So it'll be interesting to hear some of your perspective also on the resources that you're providing. I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
And I think, just to your point, that was short-term homelessness, right? We were talking about that in the conversation, right? That has, to me, this far greater chance of success. We actually say frequently around here, the streets got them. And the longer they're out in the streets, the longer the stuff that goes with that, many times it's substance, gets a hold, finds a crack, makes its way in there. And so that's not a guarantee. I know people that have been 40 years in addiction and homelessness off and on that finally get set free of those things and are housed and are productive members, have jobs, and right. But those long-term are the exception, not the rule in our experience.
And I just want to highlight the intentionality during that brief season as well. Thank God it was a temporary season, that I was very much committed to my sobriety, my mental health journey as well. I was tapping into resources. I had to justify why another 30 days, so it ended up being 60 days for me. I had to justify why that would make sense for them as an organization, and providing that short-term care as well. So
absolutely.
So about the long-term homelessness. So is that predominantly driven by addiction?
In my experience, yes. Predominant is a very good word. I never want to just put a carte blanche across the board and say everybody that's in long-term homelessness is an addict, right? But yes, predominantly, the longer a person is experiencing homelessness, it's hand in glove. Is the addictions, the substances causing them to continue to be homeless, or as they've continued to be homeless, are they more readily available, so chicken or the egg, right? But yes, absolutely. Long-term homelessness and substance abuse are an excessive amount percentage-wise.
Okay. And I guess the reason I asked that question is, based on these two groups, right? The short-term, which it sounds like substance abuse isn't necessarily as big of a problem. It certainly is. I'm sure it's in there.
Absolutely.
But with long-term, it definitely is. What percentage would you say, just if we were to take the whole of the unhoused community,
Yeah.
what percentage would be short term and what percentage is long term? Just roughly.
Yeah, roughly. I mean,
from
from my experience, 80-20, probably 80% are actually longer term,
Okay.
and 20%, and that probably points to the fact that a short term person is more
Sure.
trying to not stay there, right? And so, but those are still 20% of that population.
So 20% is short term.
I think so, and
80% is long term.
Yeah.
No, that we don't have statistics, but
Nope.
in your experience,
Yep.
So I guess kind of where I'm going with that is, if you truly want to deal with this issue, and by far the largest percentage of that group is long-term homelessness, dealing with addiction, I don't think you can solve the problem or address the issues if you don't address addiction.
No.
It's like, so I guess where I'm going with it, it seems like, cities, states, counties, they throw a lot of money at the housing issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been my experience, because like Victor, myself, I was on the streets when I was using and doing things. The people that were in that situation wouldn't take advantage of the resources that were out there because they didn't want the accountability. They didn't want to abide by a curfew. They didn't want to drug test.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to actively be looking for a job. So all the things that are typical requirements of being involved in a shelter or one of these programs, they wouldn't do it. So you're putting all of your effort, energy, resources toward something that isn't really even addressing the largest part of the problem. It's
Yeah.
kind of my thinking in it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you lived that firsthand,
Yeah.
and I would say that has been my experience predominantly as well. Many of the things that you just listed, I would probably add another wrinkle into there, which is sometimes the men who are long-term homeless don't want to get their ID. Like getting a valid identification for your state is the steps that you need to take to get a job, to apply. They don't want to do that because there's back child support, or there's some criminality, or there's something else that might be in the mix, and they're afraid they're going to pop up in a system. So they won't even do the very first step, even if somebody's helping them to get identification cards, right? And yes, all those other factors played a role. It's an unwillingness. I don't want to be harsh to my unhoused friends, and I have many of them. But it is an unwillingness to participate in their own process sometimes. And the reasons for that are probably manifold in their mind. But a lot of times it is the substance that's laid a hold, and they don't want to let go of that.
Over the years, have you seen some of the systemic issues? I'm sure you have. Some of the systemic issues around, there's a medical doctor that works very, very much, like he's almost full-time in Los Angeles, committed to working with the unsheltered. And he described it this way, and I'd be interested to gain your perspective. He used the analogy of a life, like a floating device, or like if that's all that person has, the whatever mental, psychological, even perhaps spiritual or physical resource that they have, if it's and this, just the reality of it, if it's a tent or a cardboard or a sleeping bag, like whatever resource it is that they're holding on to, he mentioned that sometimes people are less willing to let go of that than they are to reach out to some other resource. And part of the problem with that is the fact that they've done that in the past, and they've reached out and said, okay, this is a pathway, and then to be let down by a pathway, or to be, maybe it wasn't everything that it was advertised as, if you will, and they have a perception that, okay, here's a solution, I'm willing to let go of this little bit of security that I have to only be disappointed again.
Yeah, I think that's the doctor's experience there. I don't know him, and I don't know his experience, but we call it their stuff, right? That's what you're referencing.
The shopping cart that has a big...
You're exactly right. And nowadays, it's a baby stroller, and if they're really good, they got the twins baby stroller, the really longer one, and the wheels are a little bit different, and you'll see it all the time. Men and women having that, and that's their stuff. That's their whole world.
Well, it's the physical stuff, but it's also maybe they're in a rhythm of going to a particular place for a meal.
Yes.
Or maybe even a church service, or you mentioned that they need to sit through a church service to get the lunch. Hurry up, preacher, kind of thing. So that's some of the stuff too. It's the internal things as well.
Yep. We had 75 of those people here this morning, just within the last few hours, getting the meal. To your point, they don't have to sit through something with us, but yes, and then many of them are the same people, men and women coming through to get those meals. But absolutely, it is it is an attachment mentally, even more than because the stuff itself is not of great value, but it's an attachment mentally to, I don't want to let go of this because this gives me some degree of security. And I think all human beings have that. Our stuff gives us some sense of security, even though it's fleeting at best, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was an unsheltered guy with a storage unit, and I didn't want to let go of the hose that I had in my storage unit because to me that represented watering my lawn. And so there are a lot of things that represent something internally.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks to the complexity of the challenge as well. It's like, where do you find that balance of, okay, I need to do this, and sometimes it's through some sense of pain that I need to take this next step as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mental exercise.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm prophetic.
Okay.
If you, Micah Tucker, were all of a sudden in charge of all of California's resources for dealing with the homelessness, unsheltered, where would you, in your experience, direct those resources? What would you do?
Yeah, that's a super big. First of all, I would have to really pray about even taking that job. But yeah, I think the people, the lawmakers and the people that do have those monies, I think that they do have genuine hearts to try to help that community. And I think they probably get committees and people together and talk to people. It frequently, the problem is how that then gets. There's so much bureaucracy in what we do. How that actually plays out can frequently be an issue. In our city here, the city of Fontana that we're in today, the mayor here has really gone at it in a completely aggressive way. And I think that if you asked me if I was in charge of it, I would be aggressive. I know one thing I wouldn't do is provide drugs for people for free and things like that some other states and different cities even within our California have done, right?
Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't do that.
That seems insane to me, to
it
give people needles and like give them a safe space to shoot up,
Correct. And I understand even, by the way, why they think somehow that will be a solution. It's allegorical, but my stepbrother is a police officer in Oregon, and he had a canine, and his whole career was the drugs and substances. And he said they thought this would fix it. And he goes, actually, we've seen the overdose deaths skyrocket. Because now that was a deterrent for some people that these were illegal. And now that they're just being passed out like candy, it's dramatically increased. And so sometimes even when you think you have an idea of what might help, it's not. You asked me about resource. I think that I would really want to work with people who are willing to engage and get dirty, get on the street and have a relationship. And in my 25 years, the people that have had success are people that are willing to have relationships with the unhoused community, that aren't just saying,
not just throw money at it.
Exactly. Not just throw money at it, throw time. And yes, you might need to have that person paid so it is their job. Yeah. I have 16 people here that are grant funded at CityLink. That means the state, the city, the county, some of the grants federal are paying for those people, but they're paying for them to go out on the streets and interact and form relationships with people, right? And so for me, if I was in charge, I would want to figure out a way that the most of the money would be towards relational engagement, not just we gave money, we threw money at the problem. You're not going to solve all the problems even relational, but we've seen you have far more chance of success if you know that unhoused person's name. Yeah. And that's a relationship. You have to have that. You have to be willing to engage in that. And I have several people here that know every homeless person in Fontana's name. Wow. They see them and they interact with them as a human being. And when they talk to them, they listen. When the person that knows their name talks to them, they will engage in a deep conversation. So that's what I would aim for.
There's a saying that encapsulates that. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Absolutely.
I love that statement.
Absolutely. And I have seen that bore out for quarter century.
Do you mind sharing just a little bit about what you guys are doing here at CityLink?
Yeah, absolutely. CityLink has been the local outreach arm of our church, Water of Life Community Church, since 16 years ago, 2009. We started, and it's been a partner with the city. That's why it's called CityLink. It's linking our church with the city and the issues that the city might be having. We've had a really good working relationship with the city of Fontana during that whole time. Actually, the mayor of Fontana at the time flew with our pastor to Texas and went to some conferences to look at what might be done, right? And that's how this relationship began. I've been involved with CityLink myself, started as a volunteer in 2010. So shortly after it began, and seeing the growth. We were not in this beautiful building. We moved in October, but seeing the growth as we continue to try to affect change in people's lives. And we do kids ministry. We're doing stuff with the children, and our thought is if you can do some preventative work, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can do some preventative work with the children and the teens, so we're doing that. We're also working the problem from the other side of things at CityLink, which is trying to affect a cure, trying to bring viable help and solutions. But as we've said before, it's really up to the individuals that we're working with. The relationships, the money, all those things are super helpful. The person has to want to change, right? And so CityLink is trying to provide avenues for them to change, whether that's job preparedness, resume building, as I said earlier in the conversation, even something as simple as helping them get their ID, helping them work on their record if they have such a thing, to be expunged, any of those. So we're helping holistically. And as I said, all that directly below us here, they can't see that, but directly below us are 20 trailers, RVs. We got that from Los Angeles County after the COVID pandemic. They were new. They didn't get used. They had them for that. And so we were able to get those, and we have 15 of those trailers full right now. Wow. We have a bunch of families in these trailers. This is a family community. So this is children, women, and husbands.
Reminds me of camping.
Yes, and it is very much. I can't see, but it's very much like camping. Yeah. And this is transitional. This is not meant to be more than 6 months, to try to get many of the things in place so that they can get their family, as you said earlier, quickly out of this situation. What kid wants to be in a trailer area like this? Though it is nice, it's brand new, and we've done a lot of work here to make it nice for them. We don't want them to live there forever. This isn't the long-term solution. This is a bridge back into society, back into normalcy for them and for their families. So that CityLink does a lot. We also giving away groceries to people in need. So we're hitting it from about 6 different facets every single week.
Mike, if you were to create a pathway, which I'm sure you've incorporated into the outreach effort of CityLink in the tackling of this of the unsheltered community of Fontana, if you were to create a kind of a systematic pathway, and I think the idea would be for it to feel very organic and natural for the person experiencing a transition into work life, having an ID, sobriety, those kinds of things. Yeah. Could you lay out a few things that you're super intentional? I mean, I know you touched on them, but let's just say a person reached out today, and you could see them with a job, with a car, in their own home in a year or 2 years down the road, whatever period of time it takes for that person to progress into that point of responsibility and accountability and relationship and community. What would that pathway look like?
What's interesting that's the word you use. I mean, that's what it's called, pathway to housing, and that's those case managers, those street outreach people, those grant-funded people are part of the Pathway to Housing program. And what does that look like? If somebody reached out, the first thing is our street outreach tech is going to do an assessment. They're going to sit with them, whether that's in a room here at CityLink or out on the street with them, and just sit on a bench and talk and do an initial assessment, see what their issues are. A lot of the issues are the same, but some of those issues are unique to them, right? Right now we're talking about immigration. Right, that's a big topic right now in America. So for some of our people, immigration is an issue, and so you don't want to just go in and say, "I already know your problems." You want to sit with them. You want to do those interviews. You want to really do an intake and talk about what are your 3 big things, right? What are your 3 big issues, and then how can we systematically on this path work towards solving those? Not all at once, because that can be overwhelming, right? And you don't even have to get rid of your stuff right now. Let's just talk. Let's just talk, right? And so if somebody came today, it's a conversation, and it's a follow-up conversation the next day, and it's a follow-up conversation the day after that. And then if that person is willing to continue to have the conversation, the engagement, then we're going to begin to offer solutions. Well, hey, you said this is an issue. We can help you here. Hey, you said this is an issue. We can help you. We want to offer to assist you in your own process, not just come in and do everything for you, right? So that's the pathway for us, is if you're interested in your own change, your own transformation, we're here to help you and support you all along the way.
I think unpacking the complexity of one's life certainly starts in relationship and in a conversation with somebody who's authentically, genuinely present and willing to listen.
Yeah.
Because I think for a lot of folks, and I know through the experience that I've had, and I believe Chad as well, is sometimes you just don't feel understood or heard.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would to that point, as we're wrapping up our conversations today, I have a friend who had 42 drug convictions, not just arrests, but convictions for drug-related stuff, and had been in and out of homelessness for decades. And he talked to us a few years ago, and he said, as a homeless person, you might go months without anybody saying your name. Just hearing your own name said in your own ear. And so he said he started a sock ministry. We have socks and a bottle of water, right? And he said, but when you approach, tell them, have the socks out. And he said, and immediately ask them their name and then say it. He goes, you don't realize, he goes, it happened to me. I just broke down crying. It had been months and months and months. And so even something as simple as that, I'm not telling all of your listeners to go out and approach homeless people and do all of that, read, get some training, whatever, but simply being willing to engage to the person at the gas station or whoever it is, as a human being, to your point, goes a long, long way to potentially finding solutions. As long as they're just a statistic or somebody that's in the way, probably all the money you're going to throw at the problem is not going to help a lot.
Right? So building relationship, huge value.
Huge.
And then transitioning people into this idea of community. And Chad, I'm thinking about some of the vision that we have, and with fully
there's a lot of connections there.
Absolutely. Yes. And so do people eventually become comfortable as they build a one-to-one relationship? Do you see people who have transitioned into a healthy lifestyle then become more comfortable in community as well?
Absolutely, because trust is built, and they might be built one-on-one, but now they begin to trust the people you trust.
So in what ways does CityLink incorporate that?
Yep, so we have several different things that are expanding their community. So this community here, we actually refer to the people that are living in these trailers below us here as a community, right? It's the Springs community, and we're doing community events for them every week. We're also doing events where they're part of the larger. We have other places we're housing people that we're having community events. We just did one on Saturday. We're creating community events all of the time so that they can see that there are other people experiencing similar life circumstances. But it's really about trust, as I said before. It's about earning that trust. And you said something way earlier in the conversation. If they've been burned, if they've done that, we don't want to be the person that ever burned them. So we don't make promises. As I said before, we talk about what the solutions might be if they're willing to work them. And then we want them to be able to trust that we're here for their benefit, but we're not promising the sun, the moon, or the stars. I don't want anybody to listen to this to go out and say, I'm going to bring somebody to my home and promise them. That could go really badly for both of you. You could have the best of intentions and fall through. So,
I see such a biblical perspective of planting and watering and what we've discussed at this point. And just the nurturing that comes anytime that life is involved. There's a nurturing that comes in seeing a person healthy spiritually, mentally, physically, socially, having social intelligence and emotional intelligence as well. So are there opportunities for people to engage when they're willing, like when they start to get comfortable in community, to engage in an academic process or some of the practical things of just being civically oriented, like in community?
Absolutely. Just literally this morning before we were having this conversation, I have a couple of the ladies who we have in a couple of our units that they are transitional housing that are going to be volunteering here as reception for us. And that was their idea. Hey, I'm looking for work. I want to, and you guys are helping me with my resume. And these are not people that started a week ago. They've been in the program, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. But I want to, how can I give back? How can I help? I'd like to, I don't have any experience as a receptionist or answering the phone. Can I come and volunteer? And we're like, yes, please. So we're working, we actually have 3 of those ladies that we're working a rotation and putting them on a schedule. And we hope that will help them, even as they're applying for jobs, as they're doing interviews. We jokingly said, probably not jokingly, Victor, we jokingly said, hey, we might just come grab you. One of us might just come grab you out of the and bring you into one of the intake rooms and do a mock interview with you, so that you have that and be able to respond and feel comfortable in that environment. So absolutely, even to that point, what I have seen over the years is that if they begin to trust, they also don't just want to receive all the time. They want to almost immediately start to try to figure out how to give back into the community. It's amazing how quickly that transition will happen mentally. Sometimes as quick as a month. Okay, I'm receiving help. Sometimes we have to say, slow down. Let your healing happen right before, because they immediately say, I want to help other people now, right? So
we have a we have a ministry alongside the podcast. It's called Fully Restored Ministries. It's a Christ-centered recovery program for men, which, like Victor said, I mean, I'm just hearing, like, as you talk, a lot of similarities in, our vision. In fact, a part of the driving vision is relationship, community, and purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Relationship, having those relationships that you talked about, community, being a part of a community is healthy, and then having purpose, and part of that is job skills training and all these things that you're talking about. So seems like the vision is the same, whether it's, just people coming into the program for addiction or maybe a combination of addiction and homelessness.
Absolutely.
So want to be mindful of your time. Do you mind just finishing by maybe saying two different groups that may be listening to this? Those that are listening and have a heart and want to be, involved.
Yeah.
What would be your suggestion for them to, in a safe way and in an informed way, help to be a part of the solution? And then on the flip side, because the reality is that just because somebody's homeless doesn't mean they don't have a phone or a computer.
Correct.
So they could be listening to this podcast as well.
Absolutely.
So on that side, what would be your suggestion to somebody that is out there that is getting to a point where they don't want to do that anymore?
Yeah. Well, to your first group, I would say be passionate with purpose. Be passionate, but don't just in that passion go off kind of half cocked and do something. Have some purpose in what you're doing. Do a little bit of research. Look at some of I guarantee you, whoever's listening to this, there's somebody in your local area that cares about this, and go talk to them. See if you can have a time and go talk to them. Read their mission statement if it's online, and see what they're already doing, and have some passion and say, let me just get involved with where somebody else is already doing something. A lot of times people go, I've got to do something myself. And I think God in his wisdom and his providence, as you said earlier, sowing, watering, reaping, maybe you can just say, somebody's already doing these things. Where can I get involved? The Lord says, pray that the harvest is plentiful. Pray that the Lord would send workers, right? There's probably some people already out there doing some harvesting. They just need some people to come alongside, right?
So if somebody, the miracle of technology, everyone's got a phone or a computer. If somebody was going to Google something in their area, what would be some keywords that they would Google to find this ministry in their area that you're talking about?
I would say that's a pretty good one. Unhoused community homeless is perfectly fine. And then, organizations, nonprofits. I would say nonprofits. If I was just doing keyword search, nonprofits, unhoused community, and I'd put in my zip code.
Okay.
Right? And something as simple as that, and they'll probably get a page of different things.
Okay, great.
And then there might be some that are, wonky or weird or something like that, and you don't have to get engaged there, but don't stop, because that one, keep going. And so that's that group. And I think you asked about that other group that might be listening today, some of our friends, and both of you having experienced that, and many, many, many of our friends, even the people that were in my wedding years ago, some of them had been, 2 or 3 of them had been homeless before, right? Now they're functional in their tuxedo at my wedding, right? So I would say to those that are listening is don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. If you're listening to this, God wanted you to listen to this, and to say don't lose hope. There are people that care. We're one of them, but we're one of literally thousands of Christians and people even that aren't Christians that say we care and we want to do something. Don't lose hope. If you're in the local region and you're listening to this, then a resource that if you don't know and you're listening, and this is true for both groups actually, Chad, is 211. And some people know about that, just like you think of 911. 211 is the easy to call number, and it gives you the resources in your local county. Okay. And so that number is true.
Is this a California thing?
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. It's true for California. So every county, if you call 211, that will tell you the resources in that county that are here for all of these problems that we're talking about. A men's home, a women's home, a shelter, where you can get food. 211 is a great resource. It's really good just to be able to pass that along. So if you're out there and listening, whichever group you might be in, that's a great resource for you to first plug into what we might want to do next.
That's amazing. Well, Micah, thank you for
Absolutely.
taking time out of your busy schedule.
Yep, thank you guys.
To sit down with us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for being a part of this much-needed conversation as we expose the raw truths about addiction. Don't forget to like, follow, and most importantly, share. Remember, addiction is the dirty little secret that every family deals with, but nobody wants to talk about.